good to see you here at Truett-McConnell University. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here. My name is Alan Branch. I was born in Dallas, Georgia, October 31st, 1967. I don't know if there's anyone here from Paulding County, Georgia, but I hear you. I graduated from Paulding County High School. My wife, if you have Halloween this week or your trunk or treat here, my wife and I had the same birthday. We're both born October 31st, 1967. So I was born there in Dallas. I graduated from Paulding County High School. I have to tell you, the most famous graduate of Paulding County High School is a man named Ray Traylor. Now, you may not know Ray Traylor, but he was a mountain among men in my high school. But you know him by his stage persona. He died back in 2004, died too young. But he was the WWF wrestler known as the Big Boss Man. That's the most famous graduate of my high school. And I think that Ray and I would both find it very humorous that anybody from Paulding County High School, much less Alan Branch, was speaking at a university anywhere in Georgia. And we're speaking today on a topic, Born This Way, Homosexuality, Science, and Scripture. A few years back, Dr. Kaner and I were speaking together at a conference in Lebanon, Missouri. He contacted me, and I presented this information then. I've updated it some, but he asked me to present what I presented then to you today as a student body, so that's why we're here. And so I need to tell you, I'm about to walk you through a lot of scientific information. I'm going to take you through 4 or 5 major claims, and then at the end, I'm going to make a few comments from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. So we are going to get to the Bible, but our topic today, this is homosexuality, science, and the Scriptures. I've written a couple of books. You might pick up on Amazon, buy a copy, help put I have a marriage to, my oldest daughter is getting married next summer. When I think about standing at the altar and giving my beautiful 5'9", blonde-haired, blue-eyed daughter away to this old hairy-legged boy, it's like handing a Stradivarius to an orangutan, I'm telling you. But we need to pay for the wedding. And so we have a couple of books here you can see. It's Born This Way, Homosexuality, Science, and Scripture. And then another one I've just written on transgenderism, Affirming God's Image. You can pick those up on Amazon. But let me start with a quote from Lady Gaga. I don't listen to a lot of Lady Gaga. I'm more of a Waylon, Willie, and Merle guy myself. But Lady Gaga, her famous song, Born This Way, 2012, she said, "No matter gay, straight, or bi, lesbian, transgendered life, I'm on the right track, baby. I was born to survive. No matter black, white, or beige," cola, she means Hispanic there, but that word actually means some other things depending on the area where people speak Spanish. But cola or Orient made, I'm on the right track, baby. I was born to be brave. And then notice what she does there. She mixes sexual identity with ethnic heritage. Just as someone is born a particular ethnic heritage, so someone is born with some identity across the LGBTQ spectrum. And so she's making them equivalent. And then she even brings God in on the chorus. I'm beautiful in my own way. God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. Lady Gaga, Stephanie Germanata. So the question is that true? What she's saying has been very compelling to many people, especially people your age and a bit older, that we shouldn't hold people morally accountable for anything across the LGBTQ spectrum because they are born that way, and just as one can't choose one's ethnic heritage and we don't make any moral decision about someone based on their ethnicity, neither should we make any moral evaluation of someone based on their sexual or gender identity. So we're going to talk about that this morning. I'm going to walk you through several scientific claims, and we're going to try to examine them. So it's going to be boring for a few minutes. I hope that you will listen carefully. If you want the PowerPoint, you email me, and I'll give everything. I have all this typed out. I'll be happy to hand on this lecture to you. But here's some talking points for you. First of all, homosexuality is not a trait like your skin color. Secondly, no one has found a gay gene. Third, no variable has been discovered which is both necessary and sufficient for homosexuality. Fourth, predisposition doesn't equal predetermination. And then finally, correlation doesn't equal causation. Now, when we talk about these issues and I walk through these claims, some of you may just have a passing interest. You find this sort of scientific research interesting. But what I know to be true is that for many of you, this is not just some cold, analytical, scientific research and analyzing data. When you think about this subject, you think about your mother or your father, about a mother who left the family because she went into the lifestyle, a father who left your family because he went into the lifestyle. Some of you are thinking about a very, very dearly loved brother or sister who's identified somewhere across the LGBTQ spectrum. A very good friend you went to high school with. Someone in your family. It's caused division in your family and heartache in your own heart. And for someone here this morning, this is not just a dry analytical discussion about someone else. It's about you. Because there's someone here who's experienced same-sex attraction, or you've wondered if you shouldn't identify somewhere across the LGBTQ spectrum. So what I want to tell you is that the ground is level at the foot of the cross. And regardless of what you or someone in your family is struggling with, the point of what I'm about to say is, oh, I'm better than you, and I've never wrestled with this. Romans 3:23 says, what? What's the first word? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of the God. The late African-American pastor, the Dr. E.V. Hill, whom I held in extremely high regard from Los Angeles, California, Dr. Hill said, Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But we want to make it say, y'all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So this is not a message about y'all. This is a message for all of us because we're all broken and all of us fall short of the glory of God. What we're talking about today is one very particular issue. What do we make of this data, the claim, or is people really born this way? So I need to explain to you why people make this claim. And folks, in a very serious way, I have to explain to you what's called the prenatal hormone theory. So bear with me. It's called the prenatal hormone theory. And what we're trying to answer here is, why do people claim that they are born gay? Well, there's lots of ideas that have been trotted out academically. The one that gets the most traction is what I call the prenatal hormone theory. And basically it says something like this. Let me explain it to you. When you were growing in your mother's womb, the ovaries and the testes differentiated first, early on while you're growing in your mama's womb. Once the ovaries and testes differentiate somewhere weeks 6 to 8 in human development, they start producing the hormones consistent with male or female, and that drives the development of the human genitals. And so that happens very early in development in utero. The idea is that the brain sexually differentiates much later in the womb. So the prenatal hormone theory says something like this. Early on, someone's body, their genitals, sexually differentiated in a manner consistent with their genetics. An XX boy, the body develops like, XX girl, I got that backwards. XX girl, body developed like a female. XY boy, the body develops like a male. But then something happened and the wires got crossed, if you will, and then later on, the brain differentiated like the opposite sex, or some would even say homosexuality should be considered a third sex, whatever you want to say. But somehow the wires got crossed. So it's simple enough to understand. Early on, the genitals differentiate consistent with the genetics. Later on, the brain doesn't differentiate in a way consistent with the genetics. This is why someone could claim, I have a gay brain. And I've had people tell me, they have family members that claim this. Well, I have a homosexual brain, and that's why the way I am. Perhaps the oddest expression of the prenatal hormone theory came from Troy Perry, the founder of the Metropolitan Community Church, who was actually licensed as a Baptist preacher when he was a young man. Then he went Pentecostal, and then he started his own homosexual denomination. He said this in his book, The Lord is My Shepherd, and He Knows I'm Gay. Here's what he said. It's one of the oddest things I've ever read in my life. One thing is certain about me. I feel I have a total sense memory that predates my birth by a good long time. That's interesting. It's like being a seedling soul in two parts, your mother's and your father's genes. I have an awareness of having been a seedling, a physical presence in my father's sperm and in my mother's ovum before they were united. I have no idea what to do with that. But that's what his claim is. What you're looking at is someone who's trying to tell you, well, I feel like I've got female, feminine aspect and the male aspect, and somehow this has all gotten confused. So let me go back here one more time on the next slide. We'll run through this prenatal hormone theory. Just make sure you get it. Hormones drive sexual development. And the idea is that homosexuals got the correct gender-specific hormones when their genitals were developing early in development, but then later on, they got the hormones from the opposite sex when their brain was developing, thus explaining their homosexual orientation. This is often based on animal research. We should have a moment of silence for what rodents have been through in the name of human sexual research. And so what I will tell you they have done, and they being the royal they researchers that do these sort of things, they've taken little rats down in the cage, mice, and in utero, while the little baby rats are still in their mother's tummy, they've loaded them up with hormones from the opposite sex. And then when these rats are born, they exhibit sexual behavior of the opposite sex. They've given them excessive amounts of male hormones to the female rats and female hormones to the male rats. And so when they are born, they demonstrate what you might call homosexual behavior. The little male rats would run around and present themselves for mounting to other male rats, and the female rats that got the male hormones would run and try to mount other female rats. And people say, oh my, look, these are homosexual rats. But we have to be careful, because animals act instinctively. Humans are volitional. What they don't tell you is, be very blunt, if the researcher with his or her gloved hand puts their hand down in the cage on the back of these little male rats that have gotten too many female hormones, they will present themselves, it's called lordosis, for mounting even to the finger and the gloved hand of the researcher. Why? Because they act instinctively. I've often thought that this data from animal research when you're addressing human sexual behavior has gotten a lot of traction, because we are now 100 years removed from people growing up on a farm. In Paulding County, when I was a boy, we had horses. And if you've grown up on a farm and you've had horses or cows, to be blunt, you have seen some old stallion try to get on the back of another stallion. You've seen some bull try to go get on the back of another bull. It happens. But only in the last 50 years have people said, oh, look, now, from the animals, that's what's explaining it. I want to tell folks, I think we're seeing the Disneyfication of people's understanding of animals. We have a whole generation of people that think animals break into choreographed dances and sing. They don't. They're not volitional. They act instinctively. Well, disorders of sexual development. There's no ethical way to do an experiment to prove the prenatal hormone theory. The best you can hope for is what's called a natural experiment. So these are called disorders of sexual development. Perhaps you've heard the term intersex. And so we know that kids who have a disorder of sexual development got too many of the wrong hormones in the womb. So you'll have a kid that, most common one that I want to talk about right now is called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. There's quite a few disorders of sexual development. But I want to talk to you about congenital adrenal hyperplasia for just a second. And so this is a natural experiment. And so what happens is, in congenital adrenal hyperplasia, a little girl gets too much of male hormones, and when she's born, her body will sometimes have masculinized characteristics. Her genitals will take on masculinized characteristics. Now, we know these girls got too much male hormones in the womb. But what you find is, about 90% of the girls, not the large majority of girls with CAH, self-identify as heterosexual, not homosexual. We do see that a higher percentage of them than those, the majority in the normal population, identify as homosexual. Everybody says, well, how many people are gay? Well, it depends on how you define gay. At the broadest number, about 1 to 2% of people in the population are exclusively homosexual. If you ask them based on how they answer a survey based on what they think about their identity. But when you narrow it down and you define it by behavior in the last year or two, the number drops even more. So on the high end, if 2% of females are somewhere across the lesbian to bisexual spectrum, CAH girls, about 10% of them identified along that way. So there's a higher percentage of these girls than normal that self-identify as homosexual. It tells us that something's going on. There's some sort of influence there. But it's hard to disentangle the genetic influence from the social experience of growing up with a DSD. And at the end of the day, here's what I want you to know. Kids with DSDs and the data from them should give us a great deal of pause before accepting the prenatal hormone theory, because, again, 90% of these girls self-identify as heterosexual, and we know they got male hormones in the womb, and yet the vast majority identify as heterosexual. 90% identify as heterosexual, not homosexual. That leads to the next question. Well, do homosexuals have a different brain than heterosexuals? This is a question that's been asked by lots of people. Many people claim there's a gay brain. Let me start by telling you, this whole argument assumes there's a huge difference between male and female brains. I will tell you that 30 and 40 years ago, people were making very expansive claims about the differences between male and female claims, and we now know most of brains, and we now know most of those claims are sadly misguided, that male and female brains are far more similar than they are different. There's some differences in the percentage of gray matter to white matter. Men typically have a larger volume for their brain just because the cranium for males is bigger. But men and women have the same number of neurons, same capacity for intelligence and excellence and everything that's important that we'd want to know about. So to say that there's a homosexual brain assumes that there's a big difference between male and female brains, and there are some differences, but they're more finite. So the theory stated is this: same-sex attraction is caused by men having brain structures more similar to the average woman, and women having a brain structure more similar to the average man. The most famous person to make this claim is Simon LeVay. He is a neuroanatomist. He's a brilliant guy. He worked at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. He's freakishly smart. And he got into this research. I will tell you, by the way, I'm about to walk you through several guys that engage in research on homosexuality, and almost all of them are homosexual themselves. And I'm not saying that to put them down. I'm saying that as a preacher, when I read what they're doing, I think they're trying to understand themselves. Why am I the way I am? And Simon LeVay will tell you he got into this research when his lover died of AIDS in the late 1980s. And out of grief for his lover's death, he started doing this research. So he claimed to find, he examined the interstitial nuclei. I have the word nucleus up there. It should be plural. Interstitial nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, 1, 2, 3, and 4. What does that mean? Next slide, I got a picture of the brain for you up here. Just shows you where it's at. It's a very finite structure. It's not something like an amygdala that's easily observable. These are 4 very discrete cell structures. I have another picture for you just to know what he's looking at. This is from a slide. You see those little dark spots? That's what we're talking about. They've stained the slide so you can see them. These are not something huge like a corpus callosum. These are very, very discreet. And even LeVay admits it's hard to measure this area. But that's what they're talking about. That little dark spot, INAH3. That's what he's trying to measure. He got 41 cadavers from the Los Angeles morgue. People donated their bodies to science. 19 of them had identified as homosexual men, 16 as heterosexual, 6 as heterosexual females. I want to stop right there. He's got a sample of 41. It is very incautious to make global claims about 7 billion humans on the face of planet Earth after looking at 41 samples. I'm just telling you, it's very incautious. But nonetheless, he claimed that the INAH3 in heterosexual males was twice as large as the INAH3 in homosexual males and heterosexual females. See what he's saying? He's saying the homosexual males have an INAH3 that looks more like women. This explains their same-sex attraction. Well, the question is this true? I will go ahead and tell you. That was released in 1991. It is now 2019. In those 28 years, there has yet to be clear replication of his data. There's yet to be unambiguous replication of his data. But I want to show you something. His own data refutes his claim. I'm going to show you the next slide. This is a plot diagram that he had when he published in Science. This plot diagram was in there. And I want to show you something. I need you to look carefully with me for just a second. Look on the left-hand side. That's his head. No, go back to that slide. There you go. That's the heterosexual females on the left-hand side, heterosexual males in the middle, homosexual males on the right. You see how he's making his claim. On the lower right-hand corner, he's got all these homosexual males that have an INAH3 similar in size to the females. But I want you to look in the middle. There are 3 heterosexual males that have an INAH3 size that's the same as the homosexual men. What that means is having a particular INAH3 size is not sufficient to cause homosexuality. That's from LeVay's own data. Then look in the upper right-hand corner. You have 3 homosexual males that have an INAH3 size that is the same as the heterosexual males. That means that a particular INAH3 size is not necessary to cause homosexuality. What I'm telling you is his own data shows that a particular size of the INAH3 is not necessary, is neither necessary nor sufficient to cause homosexuality. And that's what you find replicated over and over again on lots of different issues about homosexuality. We're going to go to the next slide, and let me just say a few things. I pointed them out there for you. That's neither necessary nor sufficient. And I would drive home this point. Since 1991, there has been no clear replication of LeVay's results. You need to get this right. I've looked at so much primary data on this, and someone will make a claim. They found something they think causes homosexuality. It gets a big splash in the media, and then for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, other people try to replicate it, and they never can quite do it, which tells me in many cases we're dealing with a skewed sample and problems with sample. Well, what about twin studies? What do twin studies tell us about homosexuality? It's a fascinating question. As you might imagine, if you want to know about the degree to which things are genetically caused, you'd want to look at twins, specifically identical twins. So I'm going to tell you what the best data to date says. Looking at the Australian Twin Registry, a few guys back in 2000, here's what they came up with. If you have two identical twins, one of them is homosexual, there's a 20% chance that the male co-twin will be homosexual as well. If you have female identical twins and one of them is homosexual, there's a 24% chance that the other female will be homosexual as well. And research out of Sweden in 2010 seems to confirm this. What I would tell you right off the bat, you need to look at this. The response is this: if one identical twin is homosexual, the chances the co-twin will be homosexual is much higher than the average population. People say, why is that so? Is it genetics? Well, it might be, might not be. Might be the common environment in which they were raised. I need to tell you something right now. I don't have this on the slide, but listen to what I'm about to tell you. It's vitally important. We live in a culture where bad things happen to children. And there's someone here this morning, when you were a kid, something bad happened to you that you didn't ask for. And someone violated you in the most wicked and evil ways. And sometimes that will cause us to be confused, and we don't know what's going on. Did I ask for this? Why did this happen? Listen, that was an evil person that did that to you. That was not God. That was the devil that did that to you. But listen carefully. The age of sexual debut, the context in which it occurred, the age and the gender of the person with whom it occurred, all has an extremely strong organizing effect on someone's later sexual identity. And we live in a culture that is swimming in porn, swimming in filth, and it's not safe to be a child in this culture. Listen, it's not safe for boys and girls. We have men that are feeding themselves on filth. And I'm just telling you, bad things happen. Now, back to the data about twins. The higher occurrence demonstrates the plausibility of a genetic factor working at some level. Christians shouldn't be surprised at that. Listen, we are not Gnostics. We don't believe that we're trapped in a bad body. The body is good. It's designed by God. But there's been this event. It's called Genesis 3, the fall. And it has negatively affected all of creation. That's why Paul says all creation groans, waiting the redemption. And it shouldn't surprise us if there's a genetic context, a genetic component, a variable contributing to any temptation we face. I will use a simple example. I grew up in Paulding County, Georgia. Our favorite barbecue place was Johnny's Barbecue in Powder Springs. But I have to tell you, I have moved to barbecue heaven. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. It is amazing. It's almost enough to make me think the postmillennialists might be right. I don't really think so, but it's amazing. And so there is a place called Jack Stack Barbecue. And if I drive by Jack Stack Barbecue, I can smell the barbecue coming out of Jack Stack. Now, I've eaten it before. My body has gotten conditioned to it. I know it tastes good. When I drive by Jack Stack, I begin to salivate. I immediately want Jack Stack. My mind begins to think about turning into Jack Stack, eating more Jack Stack Barbecue. Now, there's an element of that. I know it's operant conditioning. I've been conditioned to like the barbecue. But there's an element of that I can't control. I just want the barbecue. That doesn't justify gluttony on my part. There may be some temptations for which we did not ask, and over to a degree which we have no control. That does not mean it is morally permissible for us to surrender to any temptation that comes along. So what I would also tell you is this. The twin data strongly questions, and I believe actually refutes, the born this way claim. If homosexuality were completely genetic, there would be 100% correspondence, and it is far, far short of that. What the twin data tells us, homosexuality is in fact not a trait like your skin color. Well, has science discovered a gay gene? This is a claim I hear repeated very often. Has science discovered a gay gene? The most common claim related to this is a guy named Dean Hamer. Dean Hamer, again, a homosexual, working for the National Institutes of Health. He's doing some research on cancer. In 1993, he claims that he found something in a region of the X chromosome called the XQ28 region. And he claims that he thought there was something going on in the XQ28 region. What he claimed was he had 40 pairs of homosexual brothers. They weren't all identical twins, but he went and did his research, found 40 pairs of homosexual brothers. And what he found was that 33 of these 40 pairs had co-inherited genetic information on the X chromosome in a region called XQ28. Now, he was doing what's called a genome-wide linkage study, which is a less precise, it's the way they did it back then, we now have more precise methods, is a less precise method of doing research. And basically what he was doing this, a genome linkage study is a way scientists say, we think something's going on here, they're pointing in that direction. It'd be like this. If I was trying to tell you how to get from Marietta, Georgia to Dallas, Georgia, I might tell you, go to the Big Chicken on Highway 41 and turn left. Well, that's kind of what a genome linkage study says. It says something's going on in that direction, go look. So I'm going to pull up this next slide here. Here's Dean Hamer. Here's his pic. Here's the theory stated people are homosexual because of a gay gene. Here's Dean Hamer's picture, just so you can see what he looks like. Here's his claim. And then let's go to the next slide. It says this: Hamer did not claim to find a gay gene. I can't stress this enough. I've heard people refer to XQ28 as the gay gene. XQ28 is a gene-dense region with lots of genes in it. It's not a gene. And he did not claim everyone in the sample had the same genetic sequence. He tried to replicate his data in 1995. He could find nothing for females, and he also found some heterosexual males shared something in common with their homosexual brothers at XQ28. But here's what you need to know. I'm standing here about 2 months after some research has just been published, August 29th in Science. This is a huge deal. Using more precise methods, a group of guys studying single nucleotide polymorphisms. They're going down to the very base pairs. Down inside the cells in your body, you got 300 billion base pairs. All these G's and A's and T's and C's lined up. It's your DNA. They're getting down to the base pairs now. So I'm going to scoot on to the next slide if I can. I want to show you this. Keep going, Pat. Yes, right here. It's the largest study yet. They looked at 400. They had a sample of over 470,000 people. They're looking down to the base pairs. This was just published in Science at the end of August 2 months ago. And here's what they said. There was nothing on the X chromosome. They could find no connection between the X chromosome and homosexuality. What that means is Hamer has been refuted. And for 26 years, I've been listening to people scream XQ28. Now the best data comes out and says, yeah, there's nothing there. In fact, using better techniques, they said this. Here's a direct quote. There is no gay gene. That is from their lead author of the part. No gay gene. And she said between 8 and 25% of what makes someone homosexual is explained by genetics. That shouldn't surprise you. Let me just tell you, when you start dealing with genetics and human behavior, it's a very tricky science. Some of you may have a family member who's an alcoholic, a mother or father. And maybe your grandfather and your great-grandfather were alcoholics. And someone says, well, alcoholism runs in your family. Well, that's an imprecise way of saying it. There are some people, because of the way that they are wired up, their body doesn't process alcohol as fast as other people do. That means it doesn't take them as much to get drunk, and when they get drunk, they stay drunk longer. Now, that doesn't mean they were born homosexual. Doesn't mean they were born alcoholic. It does mean that if they do start to drink, they have a higher propensity to become an alcoholic. It shouldn't surprise us that we find things like that. Here's what I want you to hear. There's a genetic component to everything you do living on the face of planet Earth. But there's a huge difference between saying there's a genetic component and a genetic variable from saying you are born this way. Those are two different claims, and they don't mean the same thing. So let me conclude and say a few things. Let me summarize and say this. Homosexuality is not a trait like your skin color. And contrary to popular opinion, no one has found a gay gene. There is no conclusive evidence that homosexuals have a substantially different brain structure than heterosexuals. There is no variable which has been discovered which is necessary and sufficient to cause homosexuality. And finally, I would say this. A survey of modern research demonstrates there are some factors with a low level of influence that correlate with a higher incidence of homosexuality among limited samples. However, no biological or genetic factors have yet been discovered that cause homosexuality. And I can't stress this enough. Correlation doesn't equal causation. Those are two completely different things. I have a quote from Lisa Diamond. She is pro-homosexual. She's a psychologist, teaches at the University of Utah. 2013, here's what she said, direct quote. I feel as a community, and she uses the word queers. She's not using it in a bad way. That's a term of self-identification that they've embraced. I feel as a community, the queers have got to stop saying, please help us, we're born this way and we can't change, as an argument for legal standing. I don't think we need that argument. And that argument is going to bite us in the rear end, because we know that there's enough data out there, and because the other side is aware of it too, and we are aware of it. Other side, she means people like me. How do I bring all this together? I'm going to close with just a couple of comments. I want you to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11. I told you I was going to look at the Bible. I'm going to make just a couple of brief comments. Here's what you need to know. There are people trying to tell you that the Bible isn't really as clear on homosexuality as you think it is. Well, I want to show you something. 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11, the Apostle Paul gives a vice list of 10 vices. Listen to what he says. Paul gives this vice list talking to a church at Corinth. You think your church has it hard? You try pastoring a church in Corinth. They have a temple to Aphrodite overlooking the city, 1,000 prostitutes dedicated to her within the city. Here's what it says, 1 Corinthians 6, 9. Do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? That phrase, the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God, brackets this entire vice list. Here's what he says. Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, that's heterosexual sin, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. I want to point out 2 vices in this list. There's 10 in it. I'm reading from the New American Standard. 2 vices. The 4th one says, neither homosexuals. That is the word malakoi. It is a word that means soft, and it refers to the male who plays the passive part in male homosexual intercourse. That's what it means. The next word says homosexuals nor sodomites. That is the word arsenokoitai. It is a word derived from the Septuagint of Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20:13, which tell us that a male should not lie with a male as he lies with a woman. It is an abomination. It is a word that refers to the dominant partner in male homosexual intercourse. Why am I telling you this? Why is Paul mentioning this? I got to tell you something about the Roman Empire you're going to think is weird, but this is the way it was. In the Roman Empire, if a male had homosexual sex, as long as he was the dominant partner, they didn't look down on that guy. They said, that's okay. You haven't lost your masculinity. If a guy played the passive part, they looked down on him and said, no, you've lost your masculinity. You've been dominated by another man. You say, that's messed up. That's how they did it. That should explain to you why Paul says what he says right here. Paul's telling them, the culture's told you, well, if you play this part, it's bad, but if you play this part, it's okay. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter if you're A or you're B. It's all sin. Listen carefully. I realize that you may be struggling and you may be wrestling with same-sex attraction, friends you love and people you love. This is not a message of hate. So often when somebody like me stands up and says these things, people just, homophobe, I've been called everything. Listen carefully. God, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, that includes you. And that includes people who experience same-sex attraction. That includes all of us who experience all sorts of temptation. But just because we experience something we didn't ask doesn't give us the moral liberty to violate what God says. God loves you. God cares about you. His way is always best. Homosexual activists always frequently tell stories to personalize their point. I'm going to tell a story to personalize my point, and I'm going to close with this. I was the pastor of Turner Memorial Baptist Church in Garner, North Carolina for 8 years. It was one of the most formative experiences in my life. I lived in a parsonage for 7 years. I'm just going to tell you, 7 years we lived in a parsonage. My wife is post-tribulational now. She's already been through the tribulation. We lived in a parsonage for 7 years before we got our own house. Our 2 next-door neighbors were 2 homosexual men, Daniel and Dennis. And I'm going to tell you something people don't expect to hear from a right-wing Baptist preacher. They were great neighbors. They were the best neighbors you could ask for. One day I had a leak in the roof at the parsonage. The deacons wouldn't come help me fix it, but my homosexual neighbors were helping me fix the leak in the roof. Now that's a scene. The Baptist preacher and his homosexual neighbor up on the roof of the parsonage trying to fix a leak. And I shared Christ with those men, Daniel and Dennis. I remember one afternoon with Dennis, I'd standing, there's a beautiful Carolina blue sky, and I went through the whole evangelism explosion outline with Dennis standing there in our driveway. They moved away. a church in Raleigh had given them a same-sex marriage. Liberal Baptist Church had given them a same-sex marriage. And they moved away. The last time I saw them, a lady named Josephine Carroll had died. And they came to her funeral. They were showing respect. And I spoke to them and talked to them about the love of God. And they appreciated that, and they moved on. I guess it wasn't 3 or 4 months later, a lady in my church named Wendy, she's a probate judge. Her husband was a state patrolman, Brian. She said, Pastor Allen, did you hear about Daniel? I said, what about Daniel? She said, Daniel died. Now, I got to make sure you understand, they were everything that's being told to you. 2 loving people, committed relationship, monogamous. Oh, this is... It is not appropriate for me to describe Daniel's death scene to you. But he was into sadomasochistic practices. And he died trying to do things to the human body that God never intended anybody to do. And my wife was an ER nurse for 7 years in Kansas City, Kansas. You would not believe what she's seen come through the ER as people violated their bodies in the most unholy ways, all in the name of pleasure, all in the name of a lifestyle. Listen, I don't fear homosexuals. I fear for anybody that does what God says don't do. And I'm pleading with you. Go the narrow way. Go in by the little gate. Get on the narrow path. It's the path to victory. And the world is calling for your allegiance. Go with Christ. Go with Christ. You think you know where the gutter... Listen, some of you think you're smart and you know what's going on. You don't know where the gutter starts. And you don't know how low this world can take you. And you don't know how it can steal your virtue and your goodness and your purity and every dream you ever had and rub it in the dirt. And I'm pleading with you and I'm begging with you to go the narrow path with Jesus. I'm going to ask every head to be bowed and every eye to be closed. No one looking up, no one looking around. I'm going to ask our praise team to come. Well, I know this is not a typical message because I've gone through a lot of scientific data. There's someone here this morning. You say, Brother Allen, you don't understand. I didn't ask for this temptation. I understand, and I believe you. But what I will tell you, what you feed will grow. For some of you, you are grieved. This is a painful subject to listen to because someone you love very, very, very deeply has identified, and you don't know how to witness to them. You don't know how to reach them. But maybe you'd like to pray for them this morning. You might pray for your witness to them. There are going to be some faculty members here at the front. Boy, when you preach a message like this, if someone comes forward on a day like this, it's a challenge. But I'm asking you, if there's someone you care about in your life and you're desperately concerned about, you might want to come pray and have one of the faculty members pray with you. How do I witness to them? How do I share with them in a godly way? It's not hate, it's not anger, that I love them and I care about them and I want them to know the life that Jesus offers. I'm going to pray for you. And after I pray, if you want someone to pray with you, to pray for you about a family member, a friend, I invite you to come. Father, I'm praying in the name of Jesus Christ. I'm